It was a bright and sunny Tuesday morning in the quiet suburban town of Oakwood. Mrs. Olivia Jackson, a 67-year-old African-American woman, was running her usual errands, something she had done countless times before without incident. As she drove down the familiar streets, her mind was focused on the task at hand. Stopping by the pharmacy to pick up her monthly prescriptions, then heading to the grocery store to restock her pantry. Olivia took pride in maintaining her independence and being able to care for herself, even as she grew older. Little did she know that her routine trip would soon take an unexpected and unsettling turn. As Olivia approached a stoplight, she noticed a police cruiser in her rearview mirror. The flashing lights suddenly activated, and Olivia's heart sank. She carefully pulled over to the side of the road, wondering what she could have done wrong. Two officers emerged from the vehicle and approached Olivia's car. "Ma'am, we've received an anonymous tip about a suspicious person matching your description. We need to conduct a search of your vehicle," one of the officers announced in a stern tone. Olivia was taken aback. She had never been in trouble with the law and couldn't fathom what could have prompted such an accusation. Nonetheless, she remained calm and cooperative. "Of course, officers, I'll do whatever you need," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. As the officers began rummaging through the contents of her car, Olivia felt a growing sense of unease. They opened her purse, rifled through the glove compartment, and even checked the trunk. Each intrusive action chipped away at Olivia's dignity, making her feel like a criminal despite having done nothing wrong. The humiliation she experienced was compounded by the curious onlookers who had gathered on the sidewalk, watching the scene unfold. Olivia desperately wished she could disappear into the seat, but she forced herself to maintain composure, knowing that any sign of distress could be misconstrued. After what felt like an eternity, the officers concluded their search, finding nothing suspicious. One of them turned to Olivia and said, "All right, ma'am, you're free to go. Sorry for the inconvenience." Olivia nodded stiffly, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. As she drove away, tears of frustration and humiliation began to well up in her eyes. She couldn't understand why she had been singled out and subjected to such blatant racial profiling. Olivia had lived in Oakwood for over 3 decades, and this was the first time she had ever experienced anything like this. Little did Olivia know, her son, Thomas Jackson, was about to become a crucial player in the unfolding events. Thomas, a 42-year-old African-American man, had recently been elected as the city commissioner, making him the highest-ranking black official in the predominantly white town. Thomas had made it his mission to address long-standing issues of racial profiling and police misconduct within the community. He had campaigned on a platform of reform, promising to hold the police department accountable and implement measures to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the citizens they served. As Olivia pulled into her driveway, her phone began to ring. It was Thomas, calling to check in on her. Olivia hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether she should share the details of her unsettling encounter with the police. However, the emotional toll of the experience soon became too much to bear, and she broke down, recounting the entire incident to her son. Thomas listened intently, his brow furrowing with a mix of concern and outrage. He immediately recognized the gravity of the situation, knowing that his mother's treatment was not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a much deeper problem within the local law enforcement system. Without hesitation, Thomas informed Olivia that he would be heading over to her house as soon as possible. He needed to assess the situation firsthand and determine the best course of action to ensure that his mother's rights were protected and that the police officers responsible for this egregious act of racial profiling were held accountable. As Olivia sat in her living room, waiting for her son's arrival, a sense of trepidation and uncertainty lingered in the air. She couldn't help but wonder what the consequences of this encounter might be, both for her and for the community she had called home for so many years. One thing was clear, however. With Thomas on her side, Olivia knew that she would not be facing this challenge alone. As Olivia waited anxiously for her son Thomas to arrive, her mind raced with a flurry of emotions. She couldn't shake the feeling of violated privacy and the lingering sense of humiliation that the police officers had inflicted upon her during their intrusive search of her vehicle. Olivia had always considered Oakwood to be a safe and welcoming community, but the events of the day had shattered that perception. She had never experienced anything like this before, and the reality of being racially profiled and treated as a suspected criminal cut deep. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway jolted Olivia from her thoughts. She looked out the window to see Thomas' car pulling up, and a wave of relief washed over her. Her son, the newly elected city commissioner, had arrived, and she knew that with him by her side, she would not have to face this challenge alone. Thomas hurried up the front steps and through the door, his expression a mix of concern and determination. He immediately enveloped Olivia in a warm embrace, offering words of comfort and reassurance. "Mom, I'm so sorry you had to go through this. I can't believe the police did this to you. But don't worry, I'm going to make sure they are held accountable." Olivia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I just don't understand, Thomas. I've lived in this town for over 30 years, and I've never had any trouble with the police. Why did they single me out like that?" Thomas gently squeezed her hand, his jaw clenching with barely contained anger. "I wish I had a clear answer for you, Mom. But we both know the unfortunate truth. Racial profiling and unjustified police actions against people of color are all too common in this community and across the country. This was not an isolated incident, and that's exactly why I've made it my mission to enact real change." Determined to get to the bottom of the situation, Thomas asked Olivia to recount every detail of the encounter. As she spoke, his mind was already whirring, formulating a plan of action. He knew that he needed to move quickly, not only to ensure his mother's rights were protected, but also to send a clear message that such blatant acts of discrimination would not be tolerated. Without wasting a moment, Thomas placed a call to the police chief, demanding an immediate meeting. The chief, aware of Thomas' newfound political clout and his reputation as a fierce advocate for police reform, reluctantly agreed to the request. When Thomas arrived at the police station, the chief greeted him with a thinly veiled attempt at diplomacy. "Commissioner Jackson, I understand you have some concerns about an incident involving your mother. Let's discuss this calmly and see if we can't find a resolution." Thomas refused to be placated. "Calmly? How can I be calm when my own mother was subjected to an unjustified and humiliating search by your officers?" he retorted, his voice laced with righteous indignation. "This is not an isolated incident, and you know it. Racial profiling has been a persistent problem in this department for far too long." The chief shifted uncomfortably in his chair, fully aware that Thomas was not one to be easily swayed or silenced. "Look, I understand your concerns, but my officers were simply following protocol based on a tip they received. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing." "Protocol?" Thomas scoffed. "Since when does protocol involve violating the civil rights of law-abiding citizens? My mother is a respected member of this community, and she deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, not like a common criminal." The tense exchange continued for several more minutes, with Thomas refusing to back down and the chief struggling to defend the actions of his department. It was clear that this was not a matter that would be easily resolved, and Thomas was prepared to take his fight to the next level. As the meeting drew to a close, Thomas made one thing abundantly clear. "This is not the end of this, Chief. I will be filing a formal complaint, and I will not rest until we see real, meaningful change in the way your officers interact with the community. My mother deserves justice, and I intend to make sure she gets it." With those words, Thomas turned on his heel and strode out of the police station, his determination fueling his every step. The battle lines had been drawn, and the city commissioner was ready to take on the establishment in order to protect the rights and dignity of his beloved mother and the community she had always called home. As Thomas Jackson stormed out of the police station, his mind was racing with a mixture of anger, determination, and a deep sense of purpose. The injustice that his mother, Olivia, had experienced at the hands of the local law enforcement officers was not only a personal affront, but also a glaring symptom of a much larger systemic problem that had plagued the community for far too long. Thomas, the newly elected city commissioner, had made it his mission to address these long-standing issues of racial profiling and police misconduct. Now, with his own mother as the victim, he was more resolute than ever to enact the change he had promised during his campaign. Upon returning to Olivia's home, Thomas wasted no time in formulating a plan of action. He knew that in order to drive meaningful reform, he would need to leverage his position of power and authority, as well as rally the support of the community. First and foremost, Thomas knew he needed to document the incident thoroughly. He carefully listened to his mother's recollection of the events, taking meticulous notes and ensuring that every detail was captured. Olivia's distress was palpable, and Thomas felt a deep well of empathy and outrage on her behalf. "Mom, I promise you that I won't let this go. I'm going to file a formal complaint against the police department and demand a full investigation into this incident," Thomas said, his voice steady and reassuring. Olivia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know you will, Thomas. I just can't believe this is happening. I've lived in Oakwood my entire life, and I've never had any trouble with the police before." Thomas reached across the table and squeezed his mother's hand. "I know, Mom, but that's exactly the problem. Incidents like this have been happening far too often in our community, and it's time for us to stand up and demand change." With a renewed sense of purpose, Thomas began reaching out to community leaders, civil rights advocates, and local media outlets. He knew that in order to spark the kind of change he envisioned, he would need to garner widespread support and shine a bright spotlight on the issue. Within a matter of days, the news of Olivia's treatment at the hands of the police had spread like wildfire throughout the town. Outraged residents began organizing rallies and protest marches, demanding accountability and an end to the long-standing pattern of racial profiling. Thomas worked tirelessly, leveraging his position as commissioner to push for immediate action. He convened a special meeting with the police chief and other city officials, where he laid out the damning evidence and called for a comprehensive investigation into the department's practices. The police chief, caught off guard by the public outcry and Thomas' unwavering determination, had little choice but to acquiesce. He reluctantly agreed to launch an internal investigation, promising to hold the officers involved accountable and implement new training protocols to address the issue of racial bias. However, Thomas was not satisfied with mere promises. He insisted on regular updates and a transparent reporting process, determined to ensure that the investigation was conducted with the utmost rigor and fairness. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure on the police department continued to mount. Thomas mobilized community leaders and civil rights advocates, rallying them to keep the pressure on and to demand tangible reforms. The internal investigation ultimately revealed a troubling pattern of racial profiling and unjustified searches within the department. Several officers were placed on administrative leave, and the police chief was forced to resign amidst the growing public outcry. Thomas, seeing an opportunity to enact lasting change, seized the moment. He worked closely with community members to develop a comprehensive reform plan, one that would not only address the issues that had led to his mother's ordeal, but also transform the department's relationship with the diverse population it served. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but Thomas was undaunted. With his mother's experience as a driving force, he was determined to ensure that no one in Oakwood would ever have to endure the kind of humiliation and injustice that Olivia had faced. This was a battle he was prepared to fight for as long as it took to secure true and lasting change. As the news of Olivia Jackson's ordeal with the Oakwood Police Department continued to dominate local headlines, Thomas knew that the time for decisive action had arrived. His mother's humiliation at the hands of the very law enforcement officers sworn to protect the community had ignited a firestorm of outrage among residents, and Thomas was determined to harness that energy to drive lasting change. Wasting no time, Thomas convened a press conference, inviting media outlets and community leaders to attend. Standing before the assembled crowd, his expression a mix of righteous indignation and unwavering determination, Thomas began to speak. "Today, I stand before you not only as the city commissioner, but as a son who has witnessed the unjust treatment of his own mother at the hands of those who are meant to serve and protect," he declared, his voice carrying a weight that demanded the attention of all present. Thomas then recounted the details of Olivia's encounter with the police, painting a vivid picture of the humiliation and violation she had experienced. As he spoke, the faces of the audience reflected a range of emotions, from shock and disbelief to a deep, simmering anger. "My mother is a respected member of this community, a woman who has lived here for over 3 decades without incident," Thomas continued. "Yet, she was pulled over and subjected to an unwarranted search simply because of the color of her skin. This is unacceptable, and it is a clear example of the systemic racism that has plagued our town for far too long." The crowd erupted in a chorus of shouts and applause, their voices rising in solidarity with Thomas' impassioned words. Seizing the moment, the commissioner turned his gaze toward the police officers who had gathered behind the podium. their expressions a mix of discomfort and defensiveness. "I am standing here today to demand a full and transparent investigation into this incident," Thomas declared, his eyes narrowing as he fixed the officers with a steely stare. "I want to know the names of the officers involved, the reasons for their actions, and what disciplinary measures will be taken to hold them accountable." The police chief, who had been standing to the side, tentatively stepped forward, attempting to defuse the situation. "Commissioner Jackson, I understand your concerns, but I can assure you that my officers were simply following standard operating procedures based on a tip they received." Thomas cut him off mid-sentence, his voice rising in anger. "Standard operating procedures? That's your excuse for violating the civil rights of a law-abiding citizen." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in before continuing. "This is not the first time such incidents have occurred, and it will not be the last unless we take immediate and decisive action." The crowd erupted in a chorus of agreement, their voices mingling together in a powerful call for change. Thomas knew that he had the support of the community behind him, and he was determined to use that leverage to drive the reforms he had promised. Turning his attention back to the police chief, Thomas delivered an ultimatum. "I am giving you 72 hours to provide a detailed report on this incident, including the names of the officers involved and the steps you will take to address the systemic issues within your department. Failure to do so will result in formal legal action being taken." The chief, realizing the gravity of the situation and the unwavering resolve of the city commissioner, nodded stiffly. "You'll have the report, Commissioner, but I can assure you that my officers were simply following protocol." Thomas shook his head, his expression uncompromising. "Protocol is no excuse for racial profiling and the violation of human dignity. This ends now. The people of Oakwood deserve better, and that's exactly what I intend to deliver." With those words, Thomas stepped away from the podium, the crowd erupting in a thunderous display of support. The stage was set for a battle that would test the limits of the community's resilience, but Thomas was undaunted. He was ready to fight for the rights and dignity of his mother and all the citizens of Oakwood, no matter the cost. In the days following Thomas Jackson's impassioned press conference, the city of Oakwood was abuzz with a renewed sense of urgency and activism. The commissioner's unwavering stand against the unjust treatment of his mother, Olivia, had sparked a groundswell of community support, and residents were determined to see meaningful change take root. True to his word, Thomas wasted no time in filing a formal complaint against the Oakwood Police Department, demanding a thorough investigation into the incident involving Olivia. He knew that the success of his efforts would hinge on maintaining the momentum and ensuring that the issue remained at the forefront of the public's consciousness. To that end, Thomas reached out to local civil rights organizations and community leaders, enlisting their support in organizing a series of rallies and protest marches. The first of these events, held just a week after the press conference, drew thousands of concerned citizens to the steps of City Hall, all united in their demand for police accountability and an end to racial profiling. The crowd, a diverse tapestry of Oakwood's residents, chanted slogans and carried signs that proclaimed their solidarity with Olivia and their resolve to see justice prevail. Thomas stood at the center of the gathering, his presence a rallying cry that inspired the crowd to continue their fight. "We are here today to send a clear message to the Oakwood Police Department and to the city's leadership," Thomas declared, his voice carrying across the sea of faces. "Racial profiling, unjustified searches, and the violation of our civil liberties will no longer be tolerated. We demand change, and we demand it now." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, their cheers and shouts echoing through the streets. Thomas knew that this was only the beginning, and he was determined to keep the pressure on until the necessary reforms were implemented. In the days that followed, Thomas continued to leverage his position as city commissioner to push for a swift and thorough investigation. He convened emergency meetings with the police chief and other city officials, demanding regular updates and a transparent reporting process. The pressure on the police department was mounting, and the chief, realizing the gravity of the situation, had little choice but to comply. Reluctantly, he launched an internal investigation, tasking a team of independent auditors with examining the department's policies, training protocols, and past records of misconduct. As the investigation progressed, Thomas remained vigilant, keeping a close eye on the proceedings and ensuring that the process was carried out with the utmost rigor and fairness. He knew that the success of his efforts would hinge on the credibility of the findings, and he was determined to leave no stone unturned. The weeks turned into months, and the community's resolve only grew stronger. Rallies and protest marches continued unabated, with Thomas at the forefront of each and every one. He became a familiar face on local news broadcasts, his impassioned pleas for justice resonating with viewers across the city. Finally, after months of intense scrutiny and investigation, the findings were made public. The report, a scathing indictment of the Oakwood Police Department's practices, revealed a deeply ingrained pattern of racial profiling and unjustified searches, with Olivia's case serving as just the tip of the iceberg. The revelations sent shockwaves through the community, and Thomas seized the moment, calling for immediate and sweeping reforms. He demanded the resignation of the police chief, who had presided over the department's misdeeds, and the termination of the officers directly involved in the incident with his mother. To the surprise of many, the city's leadership capitulated, recognizing the gravity of the situation and the unwavering resolve of the commissioner and the community. The police chief stepped down, and several officers were let go, their careers tarnished by the findings of the investigation. With this initial victory in hand, Thomas set his sights on the next phase of his plan, the implementation of a comprehensive reform package that would transform the Oakwood Police Department from the ground up. He knew that this was just the beginning of a long and arduous battle, but he was more determined than ever to ensure that his mother's ordeal would not be in vain. As the news of the explosive findings from the investigation into the Oakwood Police Department's practices spread through the community, a renewed sense of outrage and determination took hold. The revelation that Olivia Jackson's experience was not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a deeply ingrained pattern of racial profiling and unjustified searches, galvanized the residents of Oakwood to take action. Thomas Jackson, the city commissioner whose unwavering advocacy had brought this issue to the forefront, found himself at the center of a growing movement for change. His tireless efforts to hold the police department accountable had not only resulted in the resignation of the police chief and the termination of several officers, but had also ignited a broader conversation about the persistent issues of systemic racism and the urgent need for meaningful police reform. In the days that followed the release of the investigation's findings, Thomas was inundated with calls and messages from community leaders, civil rights organizations, and concerned citizens, all eager to lend their support to his cause. He recognized that this moment presented a unique opportunity to enact the sweeping changes he had promised, and he was determined to seize it. Convening a series of town hall meetings, Thomas provided a platform for the community to voice their concerns and share their personal experiences with the police. The stories that emerged were both heartbreaking and infuriating, painting a harrowing picture of the daily indignities and injustices faced by people of color in Oakwood. "I've lived in this town my entire life, and I've never felt safe around the police," one resident, a young African-American woman, told the gathering. "They treat us like we're criminals, just because of the color of our skin. Enough is enough." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, their cries of agreement echoing through the halls. Thomas listened intently, his brow furrowed in a mix of empathy and determination. He knew that the time for incremental change had passed. What Oakwood needed now was a bold, comprehensive plan that would fundamentally transform the relationship between the community and its law enforcement. Turning his attention to the city's leadership, Thomas presented a detailed reform proposal that addressed the systemic issues identified in the investigation. His plan called for mandatory bias training for all officers, the implementation of body cameras, and the creation of a civilian oversight board to monitor the police department's activities and hold them accountable. The city council, faced with the overwhelming public pressure and the weight of the investigation's findings, had little choice but to endorse Thomas' proposal. They recognized that the status quo was no longer tenable, and that drastic action was needed to restore the community's trust in its law enforcement. As the reform plan began to take shape, Thomas remained a constant presence, working tirelessly to ensure that every aspect of the implementation was carried out with the utmost care and attention to detail. He knew that the success of these efforts would not be measured in the short term, but rather in the long-term changes that would ripple through the community. Olivia, watching her son's unwavering dedication, felt a swell of pride and gratitude. She had always known that Thomas was a man of integrity and conviction, but the events of the past few months had only served to deepen her admiration for him. Despite the personal toll the ordeal had taken on her, she was heartened by the knowledge that her experience had become a catalyst for true and lasting change. As the months passed, the Oakwood Police Department underwent a dramatic transformation. Officers underwent extensive training on bias recognition and de-escalation techniques, and the implementation of body cameras and the Civilian Oversight Board helped to instill a new sense of accountability and transparency within the department. The community, too, began to see the tangible effects of the reforms. Incidents of racial profiling and unjustified searches declined sharply, and the relationship between the police and the citizens they served gradually began to heal. For Thomas, the journey was far from over, but the progress made so far was a testament to the power of perseverance and the unwavering determination of a community united in its pursuit of justice. As he looked to the future, he knew that the fight for equality and dignity would continue, but he was more resolute than ever to ensure that his mother's experience would never be forgotten, and that the change he had fought for would be felt for generations to come. As the investigation into the Oakwood Police Department's practices continued to unfold, the intense public scrutiny and pressure on the city's leadership only intensified. Thomas Jackson, the city commissioner whose unwavering advocacy had brought this issue to the forefront, knew that the stakes had never been higher. The findings of the investigation, which had revealed a deeply ingrained pattern of racial profiling and unjustified searches, had sent shockwaves through the community. The resignation of the police chief and the termination of several officers involved in the incident with Olivia, Thomas' mother, had been a significant victory, but Thomas understood that true change could only be achieved through a comprehensive and sustained effort. With the community's support firmly behind him, Thomas wasted no time in pushing for sweeping reforms within the police department. He convened a series of high-level meetings with the city's leadership, outlining a detailed plan that would fundamentally transform the way law enforcement operated in Oakwood. The centerpiece of Thomas' proposal was the implementation of mandatory bias training for all officers, a measure aimed at addressing the root causes of the systemic racism that had plagued the department. Additionally, he called for the installation of body cameras on every officer, as well as the creation of a civilian oversight board to monitor the department's activities and hold them accountable. The City Council, recognizing the gravity of the situation and the overwhelming public pressure, had little choice but to endorse Thomas' reform plan. They understood that the status quo was no longer tenable and that drastic action was necessary to rebuild the community's trust in its law enforcement. As the implementation of the reforms began, Thomas remained a constant presence, working tirelessly to ensure that every aspect of the process was carried out with the utmost care and attention to detail. He knew that the success of these efforts would not be measured in the short term, but rather in the long-term changes that would ripple through the community. Olivia, watching her son's unwavering dedication, felt a swell of pride and gratitude. She had always known that Thomas was a man of integrity and conviction, but the events of the past few months had only served to deepen her admiration for him. Despite the personal toll the ordeal had taken on her, she was heartened by the knowledge that her experience had become a catalyst for true and lasting change. As the months passed, the Oakwood Police Department underwent a dramatic transformation. Officers underwent extensive training on bias recognition and de-escalation techniques, and the implementation of body cameras and the Civilian Oversight Board helped to instill a new sense of accountability and transparency within the department. The community, too, began to see the tangible effects of the reforms. Incidents of racial profiling and unjustified searches declined sharply, and the relationship between the police and the citizens they served gradually began to heal. However, Thomas knew that the journey was far from over. He remained vigilant, closely monitoring the department's progress and ensuring that the reforms were being implemented with the utmost rigor and consistency. Any hint of backsliding or resistance to change was met with swift and decisive action, as Thomas refused to let the hard-won victories be undermined. One day, as Thomas was reviewing the latest as the investigation into the newly uncovered allegations of misconduct within the Oakwood Police Department gained momentum, the city found itself once again in the throes of a heated public debate. Thomas Jackson, the city commissioner whose unwavering advocacy had spearheaded the initial reforms, knew that the stakes had never been higher. The revelations of additional incidents of racial bias and abuse of power had shattered the fragile trust that had begun to take root between the community and its law enforcement. Olivia, Thomas' mother, whose own experience had ignited the firestorm of change, watched the unfolding events with a mix of trepidation and resolve. "I thought we had turned a corner," Olivia confided to her son, her voice tinged with disappointment. "But it seems the problems run deeper than we ever imagined." Thomas squeezed her hand reassuringly, his expression hardening with determination. "I know, Mom, but I promise you, I'm not going to let this go. We've come too far to back down now." True to his word, Thomas doubled down on his efforts, leveraging his position as commissioner to demand a comprehensive and transparent investigation into the department's internal affairs. He knew that the success of the reform efforts hinged on the community's ability to trust that the process was being carried out with the utmost rigor and fairness. As the investigation progressed, the public outcry only intensified. Residents, once hopeful that the initial reforms had ushered in a new era of accountability, now found themselves grappling with a renewed sense of betrayal and disillusionment. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the City Council convened an emergency session where Thomas laid out his demands in no uncertainty. As the months turned into years, the Oakwood Police Department continued its remarkable transformation, thanks to the unwavering efforts of Thomas Jackson, the city commissioner whose personal experience had ignited the spark of change. Olivia, Thomas' mother, watched the unfolding events with a mix of relief, pride, and a renewed sense of hope for the future. The comprehensive reform plan that Thomas had spearheaded had proven to be a resounding success. Officers underwent extensive training in bias recognition, de-escalation techniques, and the importance of building trust with the community they served. The Civilian Oversight Board, granted expanded powers, became an integral part of the department's decision-making process, ensuring that the voices of the people were heard and their concerns addressed. The results of these efforts were tangible and undeniable. Incidents of racial profiling and unjustified searches declined sharply, and the relationship between the police and the citizens of Oakwood began to heal. The community, once rife with mistrust and resentment, now found themselves cautiously optimistic about the future. "It's been a long and difficult journey, but I can finally say that I feel safe in my own neighborhood," said Sarah, a longtime resident of Oakwood. "The changes we've seen in the police department have been nothing short of remarkable." Thomas, ever the vigilant advocate, remained keenly attuned to the progress of the reforms, ensuring that the momentum was maintained and that the department continued to uphold the highest standards of accountability and transparency. He knew that the work was far from over, but the strides made so far had given him a renewed sense of hope and purpose. One day, as Thomas was reviewing the latest set of performance metrics, a name on the report caught his eye: Olivia Jackson. His mother's experience, the catalyst that had set this entire process in motion, had become a case study in the department's efforts to address racial bias and rebuild trust with the community. "Mom, you'll never believe this," Thomas said as he rushed to Olivia's side. "The report shows that your case was a pivotal moment in the department's transformation. They're using it as an example of the kind of change we've been fighting for." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise, and a smile slowly spread across her face. "Well, I never thought my experience would end up making a difference, but I'm glad to see that it has." Thomas nodded, his expression filled with pride and gratitude. "You've been through so much, Mom, but your strength and resilience have been an inspiration to me and to this entire community. Without you, none of this would have been possible." Olivia reached out and embraced her son, the two of them sharing a moment of profound connection and understanding. In that instant, all the pain and humiliation she had endured melted away, replaced by a sense of purpose and a deep appreciation for the positive change that had been set in motion. As the years passed, Olivia continued to watch the Oakwood Police Department evolve, becoming a model of community-oriented policing that other cities across the country sought to emulate. The reforms championed by Thomas had not only transformed the department's practices, but had also fostered a renewed sense of trust and collaboration between the police and the citizens they served. When Thomas decided to run for mayor, his platform centered on the success of the police reform efforts and his commitment to building upon that foundation. The people of Oakwood, recognizing the profound impact of his work, overwhelmingly supported his candidacy, electing him to lead the city into a new era of progress and prosperity. For Olivia, witnessing her son's ascent to the highest office in Oakwood was a bittersweet moment. The pain and humiliation she had endured would never be fully erased, but the knowledge that her experience had become a catalyst for such profound and lasting change filled her heart with a sense of peace and purpose. As Thomas took the oath of office, Olivia stood by his side, beaming with pride. She knew that the journey was far from over, but the progress made thus far was a testament to the power of perseverance, the strength of community, and the unwavering belief that justice and equality could and would prevail. In the years to come, Olivia's story would continue to inspire others, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit could rise up and champion the cause of a better, more just world. And for Olivia, that was the greatest legacy she could ever hope to leave behind.